naturalistic kitchen sink writing. It's in fact an intention. Let's say if the artist's intention is to uncover something truthful about the society he lives in or the world as he sees it, then that is a realistic intention. And that work, like the work of Garcia Marquez or Günter Grass or Joseph Heller, is a realistic work. It often seems to me that the real fantasy novels are the novels about middle-class lives in comfortable suburbs in which nothing much happens except that people are unfaithful to their spouses. That appears to me to be a fiction about the way the world is. And these larger, more outrageous fictions seem to me to contain more truth, even though their techniques are often non-naturalistic. And behind many of these novels, the novels that I have loved to read and the novels that I must say I've tried to write, is the great question that comes out of, to return to the study of history, that comes out of one's relationship with history, is what is our relationship to history? Are we masters or victims? Do we make history or does it make us? Can we shape the world we live in, or are we simply prisoners inside it? And this is this question, the great question of the relationship between society and the individual, is also, of course, a philosophical question, but it's a question which acts itself out in the study of history, and is a constant subject of the novel, more and more. And I think as the world changes now so incredibly rapidly, I mean, probably the fastest rate of change that has ever existed in human history, the question becomes more urgent. Are we able to ride this wave, or are we simply drowning beneath it? It seems as if a technology is invented, becomes dominant and obsolete now in a matter of moments. I mean, consider the sad case of the fax machine. I remember when somebody said to me that I should buy a fax machine, and I remember thinking, I don't see any reason to buy a fax machine because I don't know anyone else with a fax machine, so there's nobody to fax. And about 2 weeks later, of course, everybody had a fax machine. And now, once again, it seems almost unnecessary to have a fax machine. Consider the gesture for making a phone call. This has changed at least 3 times in my knowledge. It used to be this, call me, right? Then it was this, call me. And now it's this. Right? So even telephone technology has transformed 3 times within very brief living memory. We are living at this time of incredible transformation. And the question is, how can one incorporate that, look at it, and understand it? Now there is a problem about this. Particularly, it's also global. This is now no longer limited to any particular culture or community. These changes are everywhere at the same time. Everybody knows everything within nanoseconds. And how do you respond to that world? Because certainly literature has always rejected that idea of the world. The idea that there is such a thing as a global community that makes sense. The novel has always wanted to be, in a way, parochial. The novel has wanted to be about a particular place at a particular time, and about particular small groups of people. The novel wants to be about a woman in rural France who's bored with her husband and decides to have an affair. The novel wants to be about a group of girls who are unmarried, living in the north of England, and who go out to balls to hunt for husbands. This is what it doesn't want to be about everything in the world at once. It resists that idea. And yet, this is the world in which we now live, in which these boundaries don't exist, in which rural France is no longer separate from the rest of the world, and a village in the north of England is no longer separate even from the rest of England, but is constantly engaged with it and affected by it. And it requires rethinking, or it has seemed to me to require rethinking, how the world works. And if you push this up one level to the political level, we also live in an age in which we are constantly told lies. The versions of the world which are offered to us as real are very often false, because I hate to say this, they come as a terrible shock to you, but politicians do not always tell the truth. And as a result, it becomes increasingly important, or has seemed to many of the best writers, to offer their versions against the official versions. If you read the work of, I don't know, Milan Kundera, Wole Soyinka, Orhan Pamuk, you find that in book after book, in play after play, their versions of the truth contest the official versions and demonstrate the way in which those official truths are in fact untruths, or as George Bush called them, truthy. Truthiness was one of the great legacies of the Bush regime, and we can only hope that it's going to fade away as that particular Bush withers and dies. I mean, I found this at an early age when I was writing my earlier novels. In Midnight Children, for instance, there's a description of the atrocities committed by the Pakistan army near the end of the Bangladesh War. And when there were many executions, university professors, machine gunned and buried in shallow graves, trades union leaders burned to death in their offices. From that day to this day, no Pakistani government has ever admitted that these things happened, and have in fact denied that these things happened, even though there's photographic records, there's film record, there's video record, there's eyewitness testimony, there's every kind of possible proof that anybody could require. Yet, the official version is that these things never happened, and that anybody who says they happened is an anti-national element. And yet, if you are old enough as I am to remember that period, you remember that they happened. And so simply the act of remembering and saying, I remember that this took place, becomes a political act, because official truth is saying, no, it didn't. So that's become an area which the novel, I think, or rather reluctantly takes on, but has been obliged to take on because there is this disconnect between reality and its descriptions. You know, there's a famous line of Kundera's where he says, the struggle of man against power is the struggle of memory against forgetting. And I think that, well, that's an idea which has influenced me a great deal. The other thing I think that, since we're talking about this, and it's the subject of this conference, is to talk about this shrinking world. It's not only that the planet, if you like, is shrinking into this smaller globalized form. It's also that the distance between public life and private life has diminished. And is perhaps smaller today than it ever was before. If you go back just a couple of hundred years, you can see this, because if you look at, for instance, the career of Jane Austen, Jane Austen's career is exactly simultaneous with the Napoleonic Wars. I mean, I think I'm right in saying that Pride and Prejudice is written in 1812, and so on. I mean, the books, you can almost equate the books with the great battles against Napoleon. And yet, in the entire oeuvre of Jane Austen, as far as I can remember, there's not a single reference to the Napoleonic Wars. The function of the British Army in the novels of Jane Austen is to wear red uniforms and look cute at parties. And we accept that this is an important function. However, it seemed to her the battle against Napoleon Bonaparte was secondary to that function. And I don't say this to criticize Jane Austen, but to demonstrate that in her time, she could completely, fully, profoundly describe the lives and motivations of the people she was writing about, without making any reference at all to the public